It's time for another show from Colin Jones, the Reasonable Adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And a huge welcome to episode 117 of the Reasonable Adventurer. Today we're going to visit a beautiful little book which is right at the centre of where I'm actually headed with this podcast show, the rebirth, the relaunch of the show. We're headed to a place called Primed Adventuring. I'm going to talk much more in the coming weeks about what is primed adventuring. It's the logical extension of the idea of the reasonable adventurer, but how do we get there? And we'll discuss that and pull it apart, and I'm building all the resources that will enable you to actually work on your own self, behind the scenes, to become a primed adventurer. But I'm going to talk more about that as we go. But what do we actually mean by this notion of adventure? So there's a little tiny book by Giorgio Agamben's. It's called The Adventure. And I think it sort of creates this sort of like fivefold map of a life well lived. I thought it was a nice little extension for us to go from the unlived life and all the potential benefits that we can gain from that introspection to actually then thinking about what does a well-lived life look like. So, bear with me. If I told you that four ancient powers, the daemon, the chance, love, and necessity, stood at your birth like silent sponsors, and that a fifth, elpis, which means hope, lingered in reserve to transform the meaning of your days, how would you live this afternoon, this morning? That startling image opens the door to Agamben's book, The Adventure. In barely 100 pages, this book moves from poems of chivalry to philosophy, and it argues that an adventure isn't a tourist brochure, it's a way of being. Structurally, the book is carved into 5 short chapters: the daemon, the adventure, the eros, the event, and the elpis, each refining what adventure means in human life. The legend of the 4 presiding deities frame the first 4, while hope steps forward at the end as the most mysterious figure of all. So for the next little period of time, let's take a tour of Agamben's map in this order: daemon, adventure, eros, so love, event, meaning chance, and elpis. And let's have a crack at translating his poetic philosophy into moves that you can start using today, tomorrow, this week. So, the big idea: life as an adventure, hope that's already here. Agamben's thesis sounds pretty simple. Living is the art of a lifetime. To live well is to live as adventure. That doesn't mean chasing novelty for novelty's sake. It means consenting to the 4 powers that shape human experience: our guiding daemon, our spirit, our calling; the jolt of chance; the transporting forces of eros, love; and the constraints of necessity. So that our life becomes a form of life, not a list of tasks. And the twist: hope doesn't hover in the far-off future. in a paradoxical sense, it's already fulfilled, already present, which is why the myth says hope remained in Pandora's jar, not to postpone fulfillment forever, but because fulfillment is closer than we think. That rereading of hope is one of Agamben's signature moves. Shift the conversation from later to now. From waiting for our lives to start to recognizing the adventure that's already happening. So, let's work our way through these 5 ideas. So the daemon. This is your signature. It's what you are born with. Agamben opens with the notion of a daemon. Not a cartoon devil, but a genius or a signature that marks life. Think of Goethe's fascination with the daemonic as a shaping destiny. The daemon is the potency that makes your way of seeing and doing uniquely yours. For Agamben, fidelity to this daemon isn't blind indulgence. It's remaining in relation to a power, not just racking up accomplishments. The daemon is what stamps your doing with a recognizable hand. It doesn't force your choices, but it calls you to recognize them. In the book, his language hints at the ethics of fidelity. To be true to your daemon is to notice the recurring intelligences in your life, that inner voice, that calling, the conversations you return to, the kind of problems you can't help but solve, and to honour that pattern in the shape of your days. The chapter sets the tone. Adventure is inseparable from identity, from the signature your life leaves. So that almost probably needs you to go and sort of unpack that. I think a really good book, simple one that you can sort of tap into straight away, is by Darryl Sharp. A little book. It's a very small. Who am I? Really? Personality, soul, and individuation. And that has a wonderful little section on tapping into this notion of your calling. You know, why are you here? What are you about? And I think this notion of the daemon really, really taps into that really nicely. The second chapter in this little book is about adventure, and sort of takes us back to sort of medieval romance. There, adventure doesn't mean a safe, frill ride. It means that which happens, the unexpected encounter that interrupts your plans and reconfigures you. Modern culture often sells us adventure as something to be managed and padded. But Agamben wants to recover the old register in which adventure is genuinely surprising and transformative. His philosophical path in this part word history, part philosophical provocation. He suggests the word adventure itself bursts out of a thicket of romances, lies, tales, less a hero's itinerary than a language event that changes what life can mean. If the daemon gives us a signature, adventure supplies the occasions in which that signature is tested and revealed. Then comes eros, or love. Agamben's eros isn't just sweet affection. It's a force that carries us beyond ourselves. In a related essay, he calls eros a regenerative potency that effectively gives life to daemon. Love is the surplus that exceeds any one episode or person, the power that outstrips our plans, even as it draws us into this sort of deeper attention. In eros, something in us moves, and something in us lags behind, stunned by the oversupply of this meaning. So within the book's arc, Eros teaches a stance, treat attention as affection. To love is to see, to attend, to let the beloved instruct your perception. Eros becomes a pedagogical heart of adventure. Learn by loving. Then we get to chapter 4, right? And that is us being able to be the event. What's actually happening? So here he sort of deepens this sort of linguistic kinship that the translator underlies: adventure and avenir, which he refers to as to happen. It reminds us that adventure is not just what we do, it's what happens to us and how we answer. So this chapter sort of reorients our own agency from how can I control outcomes to how is the event speaking and what does it ask? So Agamemnon's advent isn't a sterile abstraction, it's a practical discipline of listening to circumstances without surrounding our signature. Not surrounding it, giving into it, surrendering to that signature. If the daemon is fidelity and adventure is surprise, then the event is our responsiveness, the art of being addressed by life. And then finally, we have elpis, hope, as something already fulfilled. So, in this passage of the book, Agamemnon's reading of Pandora's myth defies this sort of familiar morale. Hope does not remain in the jar because fulfillment is forever deferred. It remains because, in a mysterious sense, fulfillment is already given. Hope is not a promissory note. It's a companion presence within the very texture of the adventure. That subtle reframing makes hope less about waiting and more about recognizing. The book ends not with a triumph or fanfare, but a quiet confidence. The human adventure is sustained by hope that's near at hand. So, how do we sort of get this to become something that's part of our everyday life? It's a really, really great book. I'll put a link to it. I'll see if I can find the link, because there's actually a PDF copy of this book which you can just grab online for free. But I think it's such a beautiful little book. Why not actually go and get a copy? It's a lovely book to have on the shelf. But let's get practical. One small practice maybe for each of these 5 themes. So for the daemon, the signature sightings, maybe for a week, keep a note at, whether it's on your phone, a little apps column, or a book that you might want to write down, and just create a title, signature sightings. 3 times a day, jot when you feel uniquely you. The task, the tone, the problem you loved. Don't sort of try to force it. Just see when you can notice it. In a week, commit to one concrete act that honours that signature. Decline a misfit, accept a fit. See if you can start to hear and recognise your own calling. The thing that just keeps coming back to you, that is uniquely you, that's ultimately, why you're here. Adventure. Create a weekly unscheduled hour. No goal beyond receptivity. Take a walk, browse a library shelf that you've never touched, phone the person you keep meaning to call. The point isn't productivity. It's to be found by something. Just allow yourself to do something that's totally unscheduled. Third, the eros. Attention equals affection. Choose one person or one problem for 20 minutes. Study it lovingly. No multitasking here. Just ask, what have I never noticed? What might it need from me today? Let seeing become a form of care. Fourth, name something before you act in terms of the event. In meetings or tensions, whisper to yourself, what is happening here? Think about subject-object relations. Think about the pause, right? What we've already been discussing recently. Name the event neutrally. Then ask, what does this ask of me? You'll be surprised how often that question prevents a premature fix and surfaces the real next step. And then lastly, the elpis, the hope. Each evening, just list 3 already present goods. The friend who texted you, the breath that steadied you, the coffee that got you through the morning. Hope grows through recognition, not just anticipation. Start to note where hope is already present in your life. So, you might sort of be interested in going backwards a little bit and thinking, how do I actually find other literature or other sources that are connected to Agamben's notion of the adventure? Well, he's all over the place, from Vane to Hegel, from Beatrice to Heidegger. That capsule sort of tells you 2 things. The adventure is it's older than social media, it's older than the internet. This notion of adventure is something we've always been a part of. Second, it's not just about literature, it's about ontology. The medieval sense of adventure, a sudden transformating encounter, gives him, Agamben, vocabulary, while Hegel and Heidegger supply questions about how we become, what we are in terms of being. So commentators have sort of noticed that since parading of, fictional heroes, Agamben lets the word adventure itself be the hero, emerging from this sort of chivalry text, liaisons, legends. He's less interested in, Don Quixote's plot than in how language itself adventures. So that sort of philosophical focus, the studying the word's journey, creates a different kind of wonder, a sense that thinking too can be an adventure. That's one of the nice things that you get from this book, right? That it's not just about what you do, but it's how you understand the world that you're currently living in. And finally, on hope, Agamben's move quietly, this sort of dialogue with ancient myth. Elpis, staying in Pandora's jar, is not hope withheld, but hope at hand. A presence hiding in plain sight. It's a subtle but liberating reinterpretation that many people reading this book for the first time will find interesting. I think we won't spend a lot of time thinking about how this book differs from other people's angles, because I think, it's nice just to allow this book to remain uncontested, because it really does promote this notion of adventure, and we really don't need the contrary arguments against adventure. I think it's just nice to allow ourselves to reimagine adventure. And I think this book, because it's short, it's so poetic and philosophical, it allows us just to see ourselves in an adventure today, in the world that we're in. It allows us to connect to those signature callings which keep coming back and knocking on us and saying, hey, don't forget, there's a purpose to what you're here doing. And then allows us to sort of then tap in and think, okay, so how do we actually cope with chance events? How do we cope with love, being a part of this and listening? But in terms of where you might like to go next, I think, there's a few threads online. I think Lorenzo Cesar's translator's note that you can find online. Highlights the crucial terms, especially the sort of the kinship between adventurer and adventure. Noticing the link is will sort of change how you hear the word event. And there's some sort of criticisms out there. There's the Bright 8 review. I think that's a lively reflection on this approach. It's much less about the heroes and much more about the words adventuring through history, if you're interested in that. If you're a note taker, then keep one page map with the 5 boxes maybe. Daemon, adventurer, eros, event, and elpis. And jot your weak sightings for each one of them. How do those things appear in your life across any given week? All of a sudden, your life will get interesting in quite, durable sorts of ways. So, why have we pulled all this together? How does this relate to the attributes of the reasonable adventure? One, I've got my eye, and it will all sort of unfold shortly, about this notion of the primed adventuring, right? So I'm sort of trying to prime you in a way as to how we're reimagining adventure and you being able to create opportunities for satisfaction by really sort of connecting to that daemon, that sort of calling that you have in your life, and then developing the capacities, the mental abilities to actually pursue those opportunities for satisfaction. But we're going to get to that in the coming weeks. But let's step back and look over our shoulder and think about, okay, we've just considered a book, Agabardin's The Adventure. How does it actually relate, these areas? How does it relate to Heath's 6 attributes of the reasonable adventurer? So, for the first one, intellectuality. Well, I think the book sort of frames intellectuality as self-authorship, right? We already know that. So the ability to collect and analyse information, interpret it, and reflect on one's own beliefs in order to form judgments. It's the discipline of toggling between being a believer and a skeptic, right? Pausing to assess when ideas fit their context. So that's the daemon's territory. Recognising your life's signature is an act of self-authorship. It demands reflection, epistemic humility, the criteria for this judgment. Fidelity to your daemon requires the intellectual poise to ask, is this mine? Even when those opportunities, appear quite shiny. Second, close friendships. So remember, here the goal is discovering the individuality of others, building social capital through relationships that alter prior perceptions. It emphasises explicit social interaction and the form of close working relationships. Where's the link to the book? Well, that would be eros, love. Attention as affection. Love, in this sense, is the power that exceeds us and teaches us to see. Close friendships are the everyday school of eros. They expand our perception and refine our signature through mutual recognition. Attribute 3, independence in value judgments. This is about relying on personal experience, right? Rather than defaulting to external authorities. It's about well-functioning groups where each person is heard, build the confidence needed to take responsibility for decision, and being able to push back against the sort of dysfunctional attitude of, just rule following. So this is where adventure meets your spirit, your daemon. When the unexpected arrives, you can't outsource your response. Adventure asks for owned judgments, and the daemon supplies the through line. Independence here isn't stubbornness, it's your fidelity under those surprise conditions. Likewise, tolerance for ambiguity. So, your ability to view life as, a series of interruptions and recoveries, to suspend judgment until you have all that information. That's the event stance. Naming what is happening and asking what it asks of us requires composure with uncertainty. Event attunement is ambiguity tolerance in action. It's less about having answers and more about just hearing the situation. The fifth attribute, the breadth of interest. Interestingly, we've got this notion of the uncommon interest in the commonplace, encouraging the learner to connect assigned, whatever we might be focused on to their own, whatever that key idea or process is, to their own lives, exchanging that sort of shallow breadth for situated depth, right? Here again, it sings this process. It just aligns with adventure and eros, love. Real adventure often hides in the ordinary. Eros sort of refines sight, so the commonplace becomes the field of discovery. The uncommon interest turns sidewalks into sites of transformation. And then love, and then finally, we've got this notion of the sense of humour, that we can sort of sweeten our relationships by remaining in a sort of benign state rather than using humour as a tool to sort of undermine people. And that's the social face of Elpis. If hope is already present, we can afford to be light, to read interruptions charitably, to laugh with each other as we learn. Humour is hope's body language, right? So put together, the 6 attributes are not just a competency list, they're a training ground for a Gaben's adventure. They cultivate the inner and relational capacities that a person recognises a daemon, welcomes an adventure, learns through love, eros, responds to the event, and lives with hope at hand. So, here's a quick summary. Daemon, keep signature sightings. Act on one of them. Adventure, give yourself an unscheduled hour. Let something happen to you. Eros, practice attention as affection. Let love teach you to see. Event, name before you act. Ask what moment, the moment you're in, what is that asking of you? And Elpis, keep already notes. Recognize hope in what's already here. So, look, I think this is a really, really interesting book. It's a hard one to actually describe because it is so poetic and it is so philosophical. I think when you read it, you make the connections in your own mind, and sometimes this is must be one of my sort of more challenging podcasts to sort of project, because I'm trying to create these connections for you. Perhaps all I can say is just trust me. If you read this little book, I think it will help you to internalize those 5 areas: the daemon, the adventure, the eros, the event, and the hope that already surrounds your everyday life. So I'm looking forward to unpacking with you a lot more in the coming weeks what we actually mean by primed adventuring, by being able to preview and introduce you to the resources that I'm developing for that gradually, and to sort of allow you to sort of contemplate the sort of growth pathway that is already sitting in front of you if you can focus on the nature of the priming that would be required to equip you to be able to fulfill those journeys. So, once again, thanks for listening and for choosing a life that isn't just scheduled but adventured. Until we meet again, search for adventure everywhere.